Hi, I'm Katherine Ramos, an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences here at Duke University. It is my pleasure to talk to you today about Familismo, cultural values in communities who identify as either Spanish-speaking, Hispanic, Latino, Latina, or Latinx, and how culture and family values influence and enhance caregiving. It's important first that I highlight that although there's tremendous diversity within our community, this talk could simply not capture all the nuances of this diversity. However, there are commonalities in our language, in our beliefs and behaviors around caregiving that not only bring us together, but they also make us more similar than we are different. For this session, my hope is to share with you some important messages about caregiving for family members who are living with chronic disease like dementia or any other serious life-limiting illness like cancer. And these messages are really informed by my own experiences as a Latina whose family is from Colombia and Puerto Rico, and as a caregiver and what I've seen in clinical practice. In our community, we know that Latino caregivers are likely to be female, about 75% of them. And they live with their children or grandchildren. And about 25% are actually caring for someone with serious illness like dementia. We also know that among Latino older adults, they tend to live with their relatives. And about 10% of these individuals are in need of help from another person for their personal care. The emphasis in Hispanic and Latino culture on family, or what we know as Familismo, is really accounting for having this strong sense of responsibility in our caregiver role. In fact, our desires to give back to our members of our family and our parents in the same way that they cared for us when we were young. What we know is that past research also suggests that Hispanics and Latinos endorse very strong family-centered care. And what I mean by that is that we as caregivers have a stronger preference to care for and receive care from family members rather than professional caregivers. And these preferences are really informed by our cultural values, and it also influences our work-life balance. What we know also is that about 40% of us who are Latino caregivers report to needing to take a leave of absence. We need to change our jobs or cut back on our hours or stop work entirely to take care of our loved one. But what this highlights is that there's importance in us accessing support and finding resources that help us not only to better self-care for us, but it's also an indicator that in accessing support that we know that we can't just do it on our own. And the more we can help ourselves, the better we'll be at helping those that we love. So I want to take a moment here and highlight a bit of my story and my own caregiving experience. The first began with my grandfather who had dementia. And we experienced a lot of what we know as multi-generational care. So as we saw our parents take care of my grandpa in his experience with dementia, we as the kids were taking care of our parents in that process as well. We saw that as our parents were taking care of our grandpa, it came at the high cost of their own health. For many of our family members, they were not going to their medical appointments. My mom, for example, decided that she wasn't as hungry and was not eating her meals and was not keeping up with her own nutrition or her own physical health. And what we realized was that in this process of caregiving, as my family's health declined as they were caring for my grandfather, there was also feelings of guilt and inadequacy. The second experience that I had in caregiving was with my dad, who was diagnosed with Parkinson's. My dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's when I was in my teens. And watching him deal with Parkinson's for almost 2 decades, I also experienced him have Parkinson's disease-related dementia. In our experiences with our grandfather, my siblings and my mom decided we wanted to be as involved in my dad's care as much as possible. But in our desire to want to be in the care of my dad and to want to make sure that he had everything he needed, we were a little bit all over the place. We all wanted to do all the things that were related to caregiving. And what we found was that there was a lot of mix-up amongst ourselves and even miscommunication on who would take lead for certain caregiving aspects. What this led to was numerous family disagreements. And this was also influenced by our own experience of what we had in years prior with taking care of our grandfather. With these family disagreements, what ended up happening was that fragmented care ensued, and a lot of this created delays in decision-making. My story is not that different from those of others. And in fact, we know that in general, caregiving is a wonderful and joyful experience. We know that in Latino communities, 88% feel really fulfilled and have a strong sense of meaning in their caregiving role. We know that about 50% feel really satisfied with their social life, independent of their caregiving tasks. And about 82% have family who share the caregiving responsibilities as well. But we also know that from 2015 to 2020, that among Latino caregivers specifically, there has been a decline in the number of caregivers reporting excellent or very good health. And in fact, this number has dropped from 51% to 35%. Another example is that among Latino cancer caregivers, they're more likely to report physical strain, be in high-intensity caregiving situations, and in subpopulations, they report lower income and lower educational attainment, which put in aggregate and together may put them at a heightened risk for poor physical and health outcomes. I witnessed this happen in my own family. As I mentioned earlier, I had family members like my mom who were not eating, they were not tending to themselves. They were not going to their own doctor's appointment. They were denying that they were even stressed because they didn't even want to come across as vulnerable or as needing help. They really wanted to prioritize the care of their loved one at the cost of their own health. And so we saw that over time, their physical health declined too. And over time, it also limited their ability to be the caregiver that they wanted, not just for my grandfather, but in my mom's case, also for my dad. So there are lessons to be learned here. Caregiving in the Hispanic and Latino community is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And these experiences of also the struggles have offered me and the families I work with in clinical care opportunities to learn from the past and learn how we can best move forward. Central to these lessons learned is knowing that skill building with how we communicate as individuals and as a family unit, in addition to how we problem solve as a family, is key. Receiving information to start about dementia or chronic disease management is a way to build on these skills. It's really important that as we're caring for our loved one, we really try to understand not just the disease, but the trajectory of the disease. As dementia or any other chronic illness advances and progresses, so does it change the ways in which we caregive and offer care for our loved ones. This also influences not only our own self-care. So our self-care aspects at the beginning of the disease trajectory might also change in the middle and towards the end of the disease. The more we learn about how we're caregiving for our loved one and know more about their disease, the more we can ensure their own safety, but also we can address other caregiver issues that are important to us. With these lessons learned, there are some key strategies that I'd like to leave you with for you to consider. The first strategy is, as a family, have discussions with your family member that you're caring for. How can you honor their wishes? Invite them to the conversation. I will share that one of the greatest regrets I had in caregiving was that as we were having discussions about my dad and his care, while he was in the room, we seldom even asked him what he thought about it. We sometimes talked about him in the third person, and I wish we could have integrated more of his wishes while we were having these discussions. Strategy number 2, discuss how your family can work in teams. And what I mean by that is that within your own family care system, develop different teams that can help with different types and tasks of caregiving. You can have a family team that helps with medical appointments and decision-making. You can have another family team that's set up with family members that can help with everyday tasks and everyday care. Strategy number 3, discuss how your own family can rotate different responsibilities. This is something that my siblings and I talk quite a bit when we're getting ready to be able to become a caregiver for my mom down the line. How are we each making decisions with how we are rotating our responsibilities? What does that look like? We even started our own group chat on our phone just to ensure that we're taking consideration of what my mom needs. Then strategy number 4, learn about other medical specialties and how they can help enhance your loved one's quality of life. One particular medical specialty that I'd like to highlight is palliative care. First, it's important that I highlight that palliative care is not the same as hospice. Hospice is designed for individuals who have 6 months or less to live. Palliative care is holistic care. It is a service that can be integrated at the time of anyone's diagnosis. And what we find is that when palliative care is integrated early in the disease trajectory, not only does the patient fare better, but there's also improved caregiver outcomes. It offers an opportunity for everyone to be on the same page and be on the same page early and have a consistent message of what is in the best interest of our loved one. Strategy number 5. Request information to be translated in Spanish so the whole family can be informed. And when needed, it's possible to request for translators that are available to you and your family. This was also a lesson learned that I had with my own family. The majority of my family are not native English speakers, and so when we were taking care of my grandfather, when we were taking care of my dad, everybody wanted to know what was going on. But there was a lot of information that got missed or wasn't translated to the way that we hoped it would, and so that created a lot of confusion as to what was going on in the care of our loved one. Strategy number 6, be clear and know who the medical team is and what they do in the care of your loved one, and take notes. When I was helping my mom care for my dad, there were so many doctors and providers that we talked to day in and day out that it just became absolutely confusing as to who was caring for my dad when and who we needed to approach when we had questions. So a strategy that we learned from there is to literally just take a full list of who these providers are, what their field or discipline is, and who we can ask questions based on our concerns for our loved one. Strategy number 7. Self-care, like engaging in any kind of practice that enhances your well-being, is going to help. In my family, that took the space of being into spiritual and religious practice, being able to talk to pastoral care for guidance. Other activities for self-care can include engaging in meaningful memory making together. My favorite was just being able to gather around the kitchen table and being able to just have these different social gatherings where we could all meet as a family and really sort of move away from just the mentality of caregiving, but just be as a community and be as a family. Strategy number 8. Having access to someone you can talk to for your good mental health is also really important. I will share that in my family, seeking professional help for their emotional well-being was viewed as a sign of weakness, or that it meant that something was very wrong with you, and it was highly stigmatized. But over time, we learned that as a family, that there is this mind-body connection, and that it's central to our overall health. Taking care of our physical well-being is just as important as taking care of our emotional well-being. And we can't have good health without focusing on both. All this to say that when you help yourself first, you have much more energy, resilience, and strength to help those you love in the way that you feel is best. And now that you've heard about these strategies, I think it's also important to highlight a few more points in relation to resources, for example, that are available to the Latino and Hispanic community. For some families, they are immigrants. I come from a family of immigrants, and so sometimes there was always a concern of where do I go? How do I seek information, particularly when I don't know the English language? So it's also important and encouraging to know that there are various services within your community that are directed for immigrants. For example, here in North Carolina, and in particular in Durham, we have individual sites and agencies that are completely available to immigrant families, to individuals that are Spanish speaking, that have concerns of how to better care for their loved one. There's also different organizations that are also geared to Spanish speaking individuals to support their emotional health. One of those sites are called El Futuro, for example, where all of the providers there are Spanish speaking and can also address concerns related to health, but also in the context of being an immigrant. In addition to different resources that are available to the community, there's also other points to consider in terms of your role as a caregiver. I can highlight that, in the past there have been certain expectations as a Latina to be able to care for my parents when they get older. And sometimes that was really hard to understand, how can I be a caregiver when I also live in the United States, where I'm having to take care of myself and now taking care of my family. So it was this constant negotiation, if you will, of how I was meeting the demands of my culture and family expectations with the things that I was trying to do for my own well-being and also for my own family. So it's also really important, I think, to think about how you're having these conversations with those that you love. So thinking about caregiver in the past and caregiving now and what that might look like in the future. And I think all of that begins with just honest conversations of what caregiving looks like. I think sometimes these expectations have overshadowed our ability to have these clear communications early on with our loved ones. I wish in my example that I would have had earlier conversations with my dad of what caregiving looked like for him. Understanding that caregiving is unique to every single individual person, and what they might want now in terms of caregiving might look different tomorrow or the day after that. So really having these discussions, thinking about and hearing from our loved one of what's most important to them, and be able to tailor that and again negotiate that based on your own life circumstance and what's possible for you. One of the things that my family always argued in terms of their expectation was that they didn't want to be sent to an assisted living facility because they felt that they would be abandoned. And so really hearing the fears that are coming from their messages and how we can assuage those fears and what that looks like in terms of making negotiations of whether it's in their best interest to live with you at home or to bring in a professional caregiver that can come to the home and also support you, or to also be able to walk with them and go to different organizations and different assisted living facilities and see what they think about it. Again, this is all really at the heart of being able to have communication with your family, talk with them of what they need. But as a caregiver, I think it's also really important for you to understand your role and what you're able and capable of doing. So communication will always be key when talking to your loved one about their caregiving and what's important to them. I think it's also really important to understand your own experience as a caregiver and potential limitations that you might have. I know that for me, there was a significant pressure to always be there, to always show up, to be at 100% each and every day. And that can be a lot of pressure to take on. And sometimes in that pressure to be the ultimate caregiver, it was at the cost of my own health and my own well-being as well. And so when we think about caregiving, we also need to think about what our abilities are, what we're capable of doing, and what our strengths and weaknesses are as well. I, for example, had the strength of being able to talk to other providers, being that I am in the medical field. And so it was very easy for me to serve as a liaison, if you will, to talk to doctors and talk to my family members about what was going on. However, I wasn't the best at being able to do the day-to-day caregiving. So things related to cooking or things related to running errands were points that were quite stressful for me. In knowing that limitation, I was also able to have discussions with either my siblings or my mom of who could jump in to do those types of tasks. I think more often than not, we always focus and stick to you as a caregiver must do all and everything in caregiving. And really, if we're thinking about the future of caregiving, it's about being more intentional of our role and the different tasks that we can take on and what are tasks that we can delegate. I want to highlight that delegating other caregiving tasks is not giving up in your role of caregiving. It's just making you a smarter, more loving caregiver. Being able to know which services or which individual members can be of most help to your loved one that might not be you in that particular circumstance can be of great benefit to them. So the more you think about your caregiving role, also please consider ways in which you can help yourself to really enhance the experience of your loved one. The other piece to this in terms of recognizing your own limitations as a caregiver is to be able to have these discussions also with your loved one. I wish that I had more discussions with my dad, for example, of where I felt limited in being able to provide the optimal care for him. And because I wasn't having these conversations, I found myself becoming very stressed, overwhelmed, and burdened. And that started to affect how I even engaged with my dad when he needed his care. I also realized that in those moments, my dad was struggling with his own health and his own emotional well-being. And I think that as a caregiver, if I had started and focused on my limitations and also been able to communicate that clearly and get the support that I needed, that I could have also been more present in noticing and realizing what my dad needed in terms of his own emotional health. All this to say, caregiving is a tremendous task. It's a beautiful one, and it's a difficult one, and a challenging one. And in order to do our role as best as we can, it's really important to recognize all the different facets of caregiving. And it's also important to understand that we want to make sure we're communicating with others when we need them, but that we're also being honest with ourselves in terms of what we need. So I just want to highlight that as you continue in your journey and in your role of caregiving, that it's also okay to give yourself permission that things might change over time. And that as things change over time, your role is going to look different. And so one example of that can look like the more that I was helping facilitate medical communication with my dad and with the medical providers, later on that sort of started to shift when I would go and visit him and be with him and help with things related to meal planning. That's how I really started to get into cooking. My mom started to help me in terms of how to make different dishes and different Puerto Rican dishes that my dad loved. And so being able to also give yourself some flexibility with your role in caregiving, where it's not this static situation. So what you might start off with, for example, might look very different with what you end up with as well. And all of it can be welcomed. And so I just want to highlight that in terms of how we think about caregiving, it's always going to be a moving target, but one that we can really pay attention to by the way in which we communicate and talk to others. So to conclude, I want to thank you all for that you do in caring for your loved one. I hope that you have found this session informative and helpful in enhancing and supporting your role as a caregiver. Thank you so much.